The 1882 Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigation, Korea's first step onto the global stage in the spring of 1882, a pivotal chapter in East Asian diplomacy, was written with the signing of the Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigation between the United States and the Joseon Dynasty of Korea, also known as the Shufeldt Treaty. Named after U.S. naval officer Commodore Robert W. Shufeldt, this agreement was more than a bilateral accord. It was a transformative moment in Korea's history, marking its entry into the modern international community. Context: Korea at the crossroads for centuries. The Joseon Dynasty 1392 to 1897 had maintained a policy of diplomatic isolation, sometimes referred to as the Hermit Kingdom, tied to China through the tributary system. Joseon Korea avoided formal contact with Western powers, largely staying insulated from global currents of imperialism and industrialization. However, by the late 19th century, geopolitical forces were shifting. The opening of Japan following Commodore Perry's expedition in 1853 had set a precedent. The Treaty of Ganghwa in 1876, which Japan used to pry open Korean ports, was a clear warning that the age of isolation could no longer hold. The United States, seeking commercial opportunities and strategic footholds in Asia, took this opportunity to negotiate its own treaty, this time with a more cooperative and sovereign Korea, the Shufeldt Treaty. Key provisions signed on May 22, 1882, at Chemmilpo, modern-day Incheon. The treaty outlined a number of groundbreaking provisions. It represented a balance between mutual respect and unequal power dynamics common in Western treaties with Asian nations at the time. 1. Perpetual peace and friendship. The treaty formally established a foundation of peace between the two nations. Both parties pledged to maintain peaceful relations and support each other against unjust aggression from third parties. This clause was symbolic, meant to reassure both countries of mutual respect, but it also hinted at a larger U.S. strategy to prevent European dominance in East Asia. 2. Diplomatic and consular exchange. For the first time, Korea agreed to the stationing of foreign diplomats within its borders. The treaty allowed for embassies and consulates to be opened in both countries, marking the beginning of regular diplomatic dialogue. This exchange allowed Koreans and Americans to engage on a government-to-government level, enabling future negotiations and the handling of citizen affairs abroad. 3. Extraterritorial rights for U.S. citizens. One of the more controversial aspects of the treaty was the clause granting extraterritoriality to U.S. citizens in Korea. This meant that Americans living or doing business in Korea would be subject to U.S. laws and courts, not Korean ones. This provision reflected the asymmetrical power between the two countries and followed a trend seen in similar Western treaties with China and Japan. While it provided protection for Americans, it also undermined Korean sovereignty in its own legal system for reciprocal trade and residence rights. The treaty opened the door for American merchants and missionaries to live and work in Korea and allowed Koreans the same, though less exercised, privileges in the U.S. The agreement fostered commerce and cultural exchange, setting the stage for the first waves of U.S.-Korea interaction beyond mere diplomacy. The treaty outlined conditions under which ships could enter ports, how goods would be taxed, and how disputes could be handled. Early steps toward integrating Korea into the world economic system. 5. Prohibition of the opium trade. In a strong ethical stance, the treaty explicitly banned the trade of opium. Given the devastation that opium had caused in China, both Korea and the U.S. recognized the importance of preventing a similar crisis. This clause positioned Korea and the U.S. as partners in resisting the more exploitative aspects of global trade and imperialism. 6. Most favored nation, MFN status. The MFN clause ensured that the United States would receive any trading privileges that Korea granted to other nations in the future. This diplomatic device was common in 19th-century treaties and ensured that no other Western nation would gain a better deal. While beneficial for the U.S., the clause limited Korea's flexibility in negotiating with future powers and gradually eroded its diplomatic leverage. The broader significance of the treaty, the 1882 Shufeldt Treaty, was more than a bilateral accord. It had ripple effects across the region and within Korea's internal political and social structures. 1. Korea's first treaty with a Western power. This treaty symbolized Korea's entry into the international community as a recognized sovereign state. It broke the mold of Joseon-era diplomacy, which had been limited to China, Japan, and a few neighboring nations. The agreement prompted a wave of similar treaties with Germany 1883, Russia 1884, France 1886, and Great Britain 1883, among others. It marked a shift from isolation to cautious engagement, to diplomatic assertion of sovereignty at a time when China still viewed Korea as a vassal state. The US recognized Korea's sovereignty in the treaty, an important symbolic gesture. While Chinese officials tried to assert control over the negotiation process, Shufeldt and his Korean counterparts insisted on direct negotiations. This helped strengthen Korea's international legitimacy, though China would soon push back diplomatically. 3. Cultural and educational exchange. Following the treaty, Korea sent its first official delegation to the United States in 1883, known as the Pabings. This mission sought to observe Western governance, education, industry, and military organization. The delegation visited Washington, D.C., New York, and Boston, and met with President Chester A. Arthur. This trip helped ignite early ideas about modernization within the Korean court. 4. Prelude to colonial struggles. Despite the hopeful beginnings, the treaty did not provide long-term protection for Korean sovereignty. By the 1890s, Korea became the focus of imperial competition between China, Japan, and Russia. The Treaty of Portsmouth, 1905, and subsequent Japan-Korea Treaty, 1910, rendered previous agreements obsolete as Japan annexed Korea. The US, despite its early commitment to peace and friendship, did not intervene significantly in defense of Korea's independence. Legacy of the 1882 treaty. Today, the Shufeldt Treaty is remembered as a foundational moment in US-Korea relations. It paved the way for over a century of diplomatic interaction, including military alliance, cultural exchange, and educational collaboration. While flawed in its asymmetrical nature, the treaty also reflected a genuine attempt to build peaceful engagement in a rapidly changing world. It laid the groundwork for the modern Korean-American alliance, even as it emerged in a very different historical context. Final thoughts. The 1882 Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigation remains a defining document in Korean diplomatic history. It was a gateway to the outside world, filled with both opportunity and risk. For historians, policymakers, and anyone interested in East Asian diplomacy, the treaty is a powerful reminder of how nations enter the international system not always on equal footing, but often with a shared desire for recognition, exchange, and peace.